For 3 years, the only sound that came out of the Calloway estate after dark was a child screaming himself hoarse, and not a single person in Boston could do a thing about it. Owen Calloway was 6 years old, the sole heir to the largest private shipping empire on the eastern seaboard, and he hadn't slept through the night since the morning his mother didn't come home from the harbor. His father, Stellan Calloway, was 41, silver at the temples, and the kind of man who could sink a competitor's contract with a single phone call. He had flown in pediatric neurologists from Johns Hopkins. He had paid a sleep specialist from London more than most people made in a year. He had converted the entire east wing of the house into what the therapists called a regulated sensory environment, which was a very expensive way of saying that the walls were padded and the lights never fully turned off. None of it worked. Owen screamed every night at 9 o'clock like clockwork, and Stellan Calloway, the man the Boston Globe had once called the most formidable businessman in New England, would stand in the hallway outside his son's room and listen and be completely, devastatingly useless. Then came Piper. Piper Lowell was 27. Her shoes had a crack in the left sole she'd been meaning to fix for 2 months, and she owed the kind of money to the kind of people who didn't send polite reminders. She was not a sleep therapist. She was not a nanny. 3 weeks ago, she had been a pediatric ward nurse at Mass General before the hospital restructured her department and left her with a half-empty apartment, a suspended nursing license under review, and a brother named Colt who had made one very bad decision in a poker basement on the South End. When the placement agency called her about the Calloway position, the one every qualified applicant had turned down, she didn't ask questions. She said yes before the woman finished the sentence. The estate sat at the end of a private road in Beacon Hill, stone-fronted and severe, the kind of house that looked like it had opinions. A uniformed man at the gate checked her ID twice. Another one walked her up the front steps without speaking. Inside, the foyer smelled of cedar and old money and something underneath both of those things, something quieter, grief maybe. The kind that had been living in a house long enough to become part of the walls. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes met her in the entryway. She introduced herself as Mrs. Alderton, the household manager, in the tone of someone who had seen 11 nannies come and go and was not optimistic about the 12th. "Mr. Calloway will see you in the library." Mrs. Alderton's gaze moved to Piper's cracked shoe and back up again without comment. "A few things. You do not speak to him unless he speaks to you first. You do not enter the East Wing without authorization, and—" She paused, dropping her voice. "Do not expect to sleep." It was beautiful in the way a museum is beautiful, magnificent and completely still. Portraits on the walls, furniture that looked afraid of being touched, and then, from somewhere above, a sound that was not beautiful at all. A high, thin wail, rhythmic and relentless, the sound of a child fighting something invisible. Piper's throat tightened. She knew that sound. She had heard it in the pediatric ward, not from sick children, but from frightened ones. There was a difference. The library was 2 stories of books and leather chairs, and a fireplace that hadn't been lit. Stellan Calloway was standing at the window with his back to her, a glass of something amber untouched in his hand. He was taller than she expected. Brooder. He turned slowly, and Piper got her first look at his face. Handsome in a way that had been worked over by something hard, jaw tight, eyes the dark grey of the harbor before a storm. He looked at her the way a man looks at a lock he doesn't believe will open. "Piper Lowell," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a Reti 7. Graduated top of your cohort from BC Nursing School. Pediatric ward, Mass General, 4 years. Currently under license review for—" He stopped. "For refusing to discharge a patient I believed was being sent home too early," Piper said, keeping her voice level. "He was 8. He had a fever of 103. I was right." Stellan Calloway looked at her for a moment. "You were fired. The review board disagreed with my supervisor." "I wasn't fired. I'm on leave. Semantic, clinical." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, nothing that simple, more like recalculation. He set down the glass. "You have no formal child psychology training." "No. The last 3 candidates had doctorates, I know." They all left. He was quiet for a moment. Above them, through the ceiling, Owen's crying continued. Stellan's jaw worked. "You have 1 hour," he said finally. "If he's not calm, you're done." Piper didn't answer. She followed Mrs. Alderton up the grand staircase, and with every step the crying got louder, rawer, until it wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure against her sternum. The East Wing was exactly as described. Neutral walls, soft lighting calibrated to mimic late afternoon sun, a sensory rug, a weighted blanket, noise machines, a projector casting slow-moving stars on the ceiling. Every intervention money could buy. And in the middle of it all, Owen Calloway was curled in the corner between his bed and the wall, knees to his chest, eyes squeezed shut, rocking. The nanny on duty, the previous one, who Piper would learn later had lasted 19 days, was on her knees in front of him trying to make eye contact, talking in that careful, modulated voice that child psychologists train people to use. Owen wasn't hearing any of it. Piper stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at the room, the soft lights, the stars, the noise machine doing its gentle synthetic ocean sound. She crossed to the noise machine and turned it off. The previous nanny looked at her in horror. Piper walked to the projector and turned that off too. "What are you? Those are prescribed." "Too much," Piper said quietly. She wasn't talking to the nanny. She was looking at Owen, all of it. Too much input, too much engineered calm, too much of adults trying to fill the space where one specific thing used to be. She had seen this before, not in textbooks, but in the ward. Children who were overstimulated by the very interventions meant to soothe them. She sat down on the floor, not near Owen, 6 feet away, her back against the side of his bed, facing the opposite wall. She didn't speak, she didn't look at him. The crying hitched. She waited, 30 seconds, 40, a full minute. Then she began to hum, not a nursery rhyme, not something bright and deliberately cheerful. It was an old Appalachian song her grandmother had sung to her in their narrow house in rural Kentucky when the electricity had gone out and the dark felt very large. A low, unhurried melody, more breath than notes. The kind of song that didn't promise anything good was coming, but said clearly that whoever was singing it would be there regardless. The crying stopped, not gradually, almost all at once, as if Owen had simply run out of whatever fuel the terror ran on, and the sound of the humming had given him somewhere to put the silence. From the doorway she felt rather than heard Stellan Calloway arrive. She didn't look, she kept humming. Owen moved, slowly the way a frightened animal moves when it's not sure it's safe but can't stand the alternative anymore. He uncurled himself from the corner. He didn't come to Piper. He sat on the edge of his bed, 3 feet above her, and looked down at the top of her head. She stopped, humming. "Don't stop," Owen said. His voice was wrecked from crying, small and rough. It was the first thing he had said in hours. She started again. When Owen finally lay down on his side and closed his eyes, Piper stayed on the floor until his breathing went long and even. Then she sat in the quiet for another 20 minutes, because she knew from experience that the first layer of sleep is the most fragile. In the hallway, Stellan Calloway was standing with his shoulder against the wall. His eyes closed, his arms crossed, his head tilted back as though the ceiling might offer something the floor hadn't. He didn't say thank you. She hadn't expected him to. "Tomorrow," he said, when she slipped out. "Same time." She nodded and went to find the room Mrs. Alderton had assigned her. She didn't sleep well. She lay in the dark of the small guest room adjacent to the east wing and stared at the ceiling and thought about Colt. He had 48 hours before the men he owed money to stopped leaving voicemails and started leaving marks. She had $600 in her checking account and a nursing license that was currently more theoretical than practical. The $5,000 a week the agency had quoted her felt very real right now. She needed to stay. She needed to be indispensable, and she needed to get out before any of the very obvious danger signs in this house caught up to her. She was still awake at midnight when the knock came at her door. It was Mrs. Alderton, wearing a robe and a complicated expression. The library again. Same glass, same window, same man. But something was different now. He had a file folder open on the desk. He looked up when she came in. "Sit." She sat. "I had my security director run a background check this evening." He said it without apology. Standard procedure for anyone in the house with access to Owen. "I assumed your brother, Colt Lowell, 24. Outstanding debt of $38,000 to a man named Vasek Drabek. Check national, came up through the organized gambling circuit in South Boston." Stellan paused. "You dropped out of a master's program at Northeastern to pay his first debt 2 years ago. You've been covering for him since." Piper's hands were still in her lap. She had learned how to be still under pressure. Pediatric nursing taught you that. "Is that a problem? It's a liability. It's a family." Something in his face shifted, just slightly. "In my world," Stellan said, his voice quieter now, "family is the only reason any rational person does anything irrational." The silence between them changed texture. "There's a gap in your file," he said, leaning back. "The song you hummed tonight, Owen's night terrors, have been documented for 3 years. Every specialist has tried music. Lullabies, white noise, classical, ambient, none of it registered." He paused. "Where did you learn that specific melody?" Piper blinked. "My grandmother taught me. She was from eastern Kentucky. It was something the women in her family sang. A work song, she called it. She said it came from her mother, who came from her mother before that." "What was your grandmother's name?" "Gretchen Lowell. Before she married, she was a Hardy." "Why?" Stellan was quiet for a moment. He reached into the file and withdrew a photograph, old, printed on paper, the way photographs were printed 40 years ago. A woman with light eyes and a careful expression, standing in front of a garden. This is Elaine Calloway, Stellan Calloway Sr.'s mother, my grandmother. He slid it across the desk. She was adopted. Her birth family was from a small community in Harlan County, Kentucky. Her birth name was Margaret Hardy. Piper stared at the photograph. The melody, Stellan said, was her melody. It was what she sang to my father, and apparently what she sang to my wife, too, in the last months of her pregnancy. The doctors didn't know why it worked. They just knew that whenever Elaine hummed it, Owen's movements on the ultrasound went calm. He looked at Piper with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Owen never heard that song after his mother died. He was 3. But apparently he remembered it, Piper said. Apparently, the quiet that followed was not comfortable, but it was honest. What are you suggesting? Piper asked. I'm not suggesting anything. Stellan closed the folder. I'm telling you that you are, at minimum, distantly related to the woman who built this family, and that the song you learned in rural Kentucky is the same song that calmed my son in the womb. He stood. I don't believe in coincidences. Neither do I, Piper said. I believe in genetics and the subconscious memory of safety. For a fraction of a second, the corner of his mouth moved. Get some rest. She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. Your brother's debt, Drabek's organization. He said it to the window. I know the man he owes. We have a history. Piper turned. I'm not making promises, Stellan said, but I am making inquiries. She didn't know what to do with that, so she went to bed. She woke up at 3 in the morning to her phone ringing. The number was Colt's, she answered. The voice on the other end was not Colt. It was a man with a flat, measured accent, not quite Czech, not quite Boston, who told her very politely that her brother was fine, that he would remain fine, and that all she needed to do was make sure the alarm on the East Wing service door was disabled by 11 o'clock on Friday night. Just leave it unlocked. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just needed to send a message to Calloway. Piper's blood went cold. You have until Thursday to think it over. The man said, don't tell him. We'll know if you do. He hung up. She sat in the dark holding her phone and understood, with the clarity of someone who has just stepped off a curb and seen the car, exactly how badly she had miscalculated the situation she had walked into. She got up, she dressed, and then she did something that surprised even herself. She knocked on Stellan Calloway's office door at 3:15 in the morning and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for so long that she started to think she had made an enormous mistake. Then he said, Did they say which entrance? East Wing service door. He nodded once, the way men nod when a hypothesis has been confirmed. They've been watching the house for at least 2 weeks. The east entrance is the only one not on the external security grid. Someone told them that. He looked at her. Not you. No, I know. He said it simply without drama. If you were working for them, they wouldn't need your brother as leverage. He stood and walked to the window and looked out at the dark garden below. The Calloway estate grounds were deep and private, hidden behind a stone wall and a row of old elms, but you could see the silhouette of the neighboring properties, the rooftops, the lines of light. Someone inside this house told them about the east entrance, he said. Someone who knows the security layout. The household manager? Mrs. Alderton has been with my family for 16 years. He said it without turning. But it doesn't matter who I think it isn't. It only matters who I can prove it is. He turned around. His expression had gone into something harder and very still, the face of a man who was used to solving problems that couldn't be solved in court. You're going to call them back, he said. Tomorrow morning. You're going to tell them you'll do it. Piper felt the floor shift slightly beneath her. I want them to think you agreed. We have 48 hours to find the leak and set a counter. He watched her face. Can you do that? I'm a nurse, she said. I've told a 6-year-old that a needle won't hurt. Yes, I can do it. The next 2 days were the strangest Piper had ever spent. By day, she was Owen's companion, sitting on the floor of the East Wing while he built elaborate cities out of architectural blocks, reading to him, humming when he asked her to, watching the careful way he was beginning to open like something that had been kept in a dark drawer for too long and was slowly remembering that light existed. By night, she was acutely, constantly aware of every person in the house. Mrs. Alderton, who was efficient and humorless and whose loyalty to the Calloway name seemed to run bone-deep. Regan, the day housekeeper, who had started 3 months ago, right around when Stellan had renovated the security system. Philip, the groundskeeper who moved through the property with a proprietary ease that might be long familiarity or might be something else. It was none of them. On Thursday afternoon, Owen was in the garden for his daily outdoor hour, supervised by Mrs. Alderton. Piper was in the East Wing putting away clean linens when she heard it. A very small sound, the kind that wouldn't register unless you had spent years learning to hear what children couldn't say. A cabinet, closing with slightly too much care, she followed it to the nursery bathroom. The medicine cabinet was ajar. A small glass vial was standing on the shelf next to Owen's prescribed sleep aid, identical in size and shape, but the label was wrong. The handwriting was wrong. She picked it up. She smelled the cap. Sedative, high concentration. The kind that would make a 6-year-old sleep so deeply he wouldn't respond to a fire alarm, or to being carried out a service entrance. The plan wasn't to send a message to Calloway. The plan was to take his son. Piper put the vial in her pocket. She walked out of the east wing, down the back stairs, through the kitchen, and found Stellan in the driveway talking to his driver. She handed him the vial without a word. He looked at it. He looked at her. The color left his face in a way that made him look, for just a moment, less like a formidable businessman, and more like a man who had already lost one person who was irreplaceable. Where did you find this? Owen's bathroom cabinet. Someone switched it with his sleep aid. He closed his hand around the vial. His voice, when it came, was very quiet. Who was in that room today? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I came back at 2 o'clock and the cleaning schedule says Regan did the upstairs this morning. She would have. Regan's been with us 3 months. He said it to himself, not to her. His jaw was tight. I hired her through the same agency that referred you. She knew about the east entrance, Piper said. He was already on his phone. What happened next took 32 minutes. Stellan Calloway made 3 calls. His security director arrived at the estate with 2 colleagues. Regan, who had been in the laundry room, was brought to the library. She was 23 years old, and she cried for most of the conversation. Real, frightened tears. She had a younger sister in a Czech community in Somerville. The same people who had been holding documentation over her sister for 4 months. She hadn't wanted to. She hadn't had a choice. She had told herself it was just information, just telling them where the cameras were, just confirming a layout. She hadn't known about the vial, or she had known and had not let herself know she knew. Piper sat outside the library and heard all of it through the door and felt something that was not quite sympathy and not quite anger, and was exactly the feeling of being 27 years old and understanding for the first time that the world is full of people doing terrible things for ordinary reasons. Owen was moved to a secure room on the 2nd floor. 2 additional guards were placed at the house perimeter. And at 11 o'clock on Friday night, when the service entrance opened from the outside, it was not unlocked from within. It opened because Stellan Calloway's security team had removed the entire door and replaced it with one equipped with a tracking mechanism. And on the other side were 3 men who walked into a situation they were comprehensively unprepared for. Drabek himself was not among them. He was, Stellan's director reported by phone at midnight, currently boarding a flight to Newark that he would not complete, because Stellan had made a call to a man who owed him a favor at the federal level, and the FBI had a long-standing interest in Vasek Drabek's South Boston operation that predated anything to do with Colt Lowell by several years. Colt was found in a storage unit in Dorchester. He was frightened and hungry, and had a bruise on his jaw that would take a week to fade, and when Piper saw him in the back seat of one of Stellan's cars, she burst into tears before she could stop herself, which she would later be very embarrassed about. "You're okay," she kept saying, holding his face in her hands the way she had when they were children, and he'd come home from school having said something to the wrong person. "You're okay." "I know," Colt said. "I know. I'm sorry, Pipe. I'm so sorry." She wanted to be angry. She had been angry for 5 years, really. A low, exhausting anger that lived under her love for him like a stone under water. She had deferred her own ambitions and spent her own savings and gone without things she needed, because the alternative was watching him disappear into a consequence she couldn't undo. But he was here. He was okay, and she was too tired for anything other than relief. Stellan found her on the front steps at 2 in the morning after Colt had been taken somewhere safe by Mrs. Alderton, who had apparently been informed of the full situation and had responded by making an enormous amount of pasta. He sat beside her on the steps. Not close. He looked out at the dark road. "The FBI will have Drabek detained within 72 hours, he said. The charges relate to his operation broadly. Colt's debt was effectively dissolved when the holding organization was flagged as a criminal enterprise. It's not the cleanest legal path, but it holds." "Thank you," Piper said. The 2 words felt very small. "You found the vial," he said. "That was you. Not my security team, not the surveillance system. You." He paused. "You were listening in a way the rest of us weren't. That's just nursing," she said. "You learned to hear the wrong sound in a room full of right ones." He was quiet for a moment. She could see his breath in the October air. "My wife's name was Clara," he said. It seemed to cost him something to say it out loud. She was from a family in western Massachusetts. Old money, complicated history. Her mother's people came to New England from the Appalachian borderlands, back before the Revolution. They brought their music with them. He stopped. She used to hum the same song your grandmother taught you. She didn't know where it came from. She said it was just in her, the same way some things are just in you. Piper didn't say anything. I hired 12 people to fix my son, Stellan said. None of them were related to his mother by 6 generations of shared folk melody. He almost smiled. It was the smallest possible smile, the kind that lives in the eyes rather than the mouth. I'm not a man who uses the word fate. Neither am I, Piper said. I'm a nurse. I believe in pathways and recognition. And yet, she agreed. Owen's voice came from upstairs calling for her, not in the desperate, fraying way of the past 3 years, but the ordinary way of a child who has woken from a sound sleep and wants the comfortable person nearby. It was the most beautiful sound Piper had ever heard. She stood. I'll go, Piper. Stellan said her name and stopped as if he had used up all his words on difficult things and didn't have any left for the thing he actually wanted to say. In the morning, there's something I need to discuss with you, about your role here going forward. She looked at him in the dark. His face was serious and carefully composed in the way people compose their faces when they are feeling something they have not yet named. Okay, she said. Get some rest, he said. Both of you. She went inside. She went up the stairs to where Owen was sitting up in his bed with the drowsy, cooperative expression of a child who is 90% asleep and simply needs someone to put a hand on his back and let him know the world is still in order. She sat on the edge of the bed. She put her hand on his back. Piper, he said, already sinking. Right here. She began to hum, low and unhurried, the old song that had traveled from eastern Kentucky through 3 generations of women who had never known it, was also traveling through the Calloway bloodline on its way to this room, to this child, to this particular moment of the world, being asked to be ordinary and gentle. Owen was asleep in 4 minutes. Piper stayed until she was sure, really sure, not just hoping sure, and then she sat in the dark for a little while longer, listening to the house breathe. 7 months later, the Calloway estate sounded like a different place. There was a dog now, a large and pointless golden retriever that Owen had named Captain, and that Mrs. Alderton tolerated with a dignity that bordered on heroic. There were toys in the main hallway and small muddy footprints on the kitchen tiles that no one seemed to be in any particular hurry to clean. Colt came to dinner on Sundays, and had been enrolled in an outpatient program for compulsive gambling that he attended with something that was slowly beginning to resemble genuine commitment. On a Thursday evening in May, Piper was in the garden with Owen, who was attempting to teach Captain to fetch a stick that was frankly too large for the dog's mouth. From the back terrace, she could hear Stellan on the phone, finishing a call, his voice doing that thing it did when he was wrapping up business, clipped and final, and then going quiet. She heard him come across the terrace. She heard him stop at the garden steps. She didn't look up because Owen was in the middle of something important involving a dog and a stick, and she had learned that the most significant things in the Calloway house had a way of arriving without announcement. He's getting better at that, Stellan said from the top of the steps. He's trying, Owen corrected, very seriously. That counts, Stellan said. He came down the steps. He stood next to Piper. After a moment, because he was a man who found most things easier to say while looking at something else, he said, I talked to the board today. I'm taking a month in August. No calls, no travel. I thought we could take Owen to see the coast. Piper looked at him. We, she said, if you're willing, he said. Which was, she had learned, how Stellan Calloway said most things he actually meant. She looked back at Owen, who was now sitting in the grass with Captain's enormous head in his lap, laughing, a full, unguarded sound, the laugh of a child who has forgotten to be careful. I think we could manage that, she said. Stellan didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He stood beside her in the late afternoon light while his son laughed in the grass, and the old melody was somewhere underneath all of it, the way it had always been. In the walls, in the bloodline, in the particular way that things which are meant to find each other eventually do, across all the years and the distance and the wrong turns that look, only in retrospect, like the only possible way home.